Hey, well, welcome everybody. Just wait for the music to go off. Heather? Thank you. Just want to welcome you to the third session of our Developing Consciousness course that we're doing today. And today we're going to talk really about spirituality. And I just want to give you a little bit of an idea as to where we've come from and the shape of the course. I know some of you know this, but just for those that you don't, the whole idea of the course is about looking at how we can become more conscious of what's going on in our lives. Someone once asked me what I thought the purpose of religion, spirituality was, and I said that I thought it was to live life more skillfully. And how do we, in the way that we go about our lives, work out how to live life more skillfully? And so we started off in the first week looking at the nature of, it's called developing consciousness, so let's look at what the nature of consciousness is. And we came down to the idea that, consciousness is really about our senses and about the way that we receive information from our senses, and then we create a reality out of that. And we looked at the way that, in fact, when we create our reality, sometimes it's not the way we think it is. What we think is going on is not necessarily what's going on. However, we make the best guess that we can from what our senses tell us. And then last week we looked at the nature of the mind and the part that the mind plays in the creation of our reality and the creation of what goes on. And of course, it's a huge part that it plays. And one of the key things I said from last week was, even though we think, even though we rationalize, that we have to get to the understanding that you are not your mind. And that although you might identify with your mind, you might identify with your thoughts, you might identify with all the things that go on, it's important to have that realization that your mind is just all the good ideas you ever had and the best guess of where you should be going next. And you're not your personality either. I mentioned last week the idea of your personality. The word comes from a persona, and that the persona was the mask that people wore in Greek theatre in the ancient times. That was the persona, literally that which is spoken through. So you're not your personality. You're not your mind, you're not personality, and yet most of the world thinks of itself as being its own mind. An individual will think of itself, its thoughts, its personality, that's who it is. But we looked at the possibility last week that there's something possibly beyond that. And I mentioned a quote from the Dalai Lama who said that really consciousness is not at all material. You can't measure it. And he was suggesting that consciousness was the facility by which we know. It's the facility by which we know. We have our senses. I look over and I see a blue shirt over there. I am the person seeing a blue shirt, and we tend to look at that as consciousness. But what the Dalai Lama suggests is that is like the film of the camera. That is where the image is appearing, but there's something greater than that. Heather, I'm booming a little. Could you turn me down in the room? That'd be great. There is something beyond that. There's something greater than that. Almost the camera itself. And that consciousness is something that actually is greater than the experience of the rational mind. And therefore, consciousness is something, come in and have a seat, that's great. Consciousness, therefore, is something that is the facility by which we know anything. It is something that holds the mind and holds consciousness. And therefore, if it's that, then there's a possibility that if we can get beyond our minds, if we can just get beyond the nature of our thinking, then somehow we can rise above a bit and begin to see the wood for the trees. Somehow we can actually get a sense of something that's greater than our minds. And we did a few exercises last week whereby, we looked at that and looked at what that sense of something greater. And today, I'd like to welcome all those who are streaming online. It's good to have you with us today. Today we're going to be looking at what that greater sense of consciousness might be, that sort of greater spirituality. And today's really about spirituality. Before I start, I just want to say, has anyone got any questions they'd like to ask at all about what I've just said? Yeah. Sorry, so I'm going to say that again. What is the...
Subconsciousness and unconsciousness at all?
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, but there are, in a sense, there are yards of books written about that. A lot of that is taken up with the mind and how the mind analyzes what's going on and the different segments of thinking and all that sort of business. But I'm going to talk, I'm not going to go into the detail of those various bits of it, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that sort of thing a bit later on. Good. Yes?
Just a semantical question.
I'm just going to give you this just for the
Sure.
just for the live stream. Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah.
Just a semantical question. The facility by which we know.
Yeah.
So know is normally a verb associated with mind. Can you think of something, the facility by which we...
Are aware. The facility by which we are conscious. It is that bit which enables us to appreciate everything else. So we're going to talk, I want you to really use lay language in all of this, rather than use religious language. And it's difficult when you come to the idea of talking about spirituality. The temptation is to look at religious language a lot. But the best definition of spirituality that I've come across is from Rowan Williams, who used to be the Archbishop of Canterbury before the one that's Archbishop of Canterbury now. Now, some of these things I'm going to say now are in the notes that I'm going to give you afterwards. So they are in the notes. And if you've missed anything, there is the book that's at the back, which covers all the different aspects of the course that you can get at the back of the room. And it's online. If you're online, it's just on Amazon. And it's called Developing Consciousness. So his definition of spirituality, Rowan Williams, he said that spirituality was the cultivation of a sensitive and rewarding relationship with eternal truth and love. Now, it's a big sentence to actually get, but I think it's really interesting because he says that spirituality is the cultivation. Now, that means that it's an ongoing, like agrarian work. It's something that is continually being done. It's the cultivation of a sensitive. And I think that's important because spirituality is not abusive. It is a sensitive. It is where I am sensing what's going on with me, you are sensing and there is something within that of a relationship. So the cultivation of a sensitive and rewarding, it's an enriching experience. The cultivation of a sensitive and rewarding, and then the big word, relationship. So spirituality is a relationship. And when it's a relationship with what, he suggests, Rowan Williams, that it's a relationship with eternal truth and love. Now that really, in a sense, is the universe on one level. Eternal truth, the whole nature of eternal truth, that which is eternally so, is almost a description of the universe. And love, my definition of love is a self-giving nature. Love is self-giving, and therefore there is a relationship with the self-giving essence that is at the heart of the universe. So spirituality is that relationship that we have with the eternal aspects of the universe. And I think that's quite a good definition of what spirituality might be. I mean, when I was, I really only became interested in spirituality when I was about 25. Before then, not at all, really. I mean, when I look at... my father died when I was 2. Just a bit of history of how I've got to be where I am now. My father died when I was 2. And that really has a big effect on a family. And there was my brother and my mother and myself. And my brother was 6 weeks old when my father died. I remember my mother saying to me later that when my brother died, the milk dried in her breasts. And that was an expression almost of love going out of our family. There was a sort of a sense by which after that, my mother did well, but she just coped. We had good birthdays, we had Christmases, but there wasn't sort of that gel, that oxygen of love in the family. And I grew up within that. And as a result, what my desire was therefore to have attention. And therefore I did what I needed to do to get attention. And I just became sort of instantly dysfunctional. I would try to set fire to the garage. I ate weed killer, had to rush to the hospital, put nails under my, anything I could do, it was all about that. I remember my mother telling me once of a time when she was off at a dinner party, and the houses in England quite close together, and she was opposite in the next house opposite across the street, and it was in the middle of the dinner party, and a woman turned to my mother in the middle of, we were 5 and 3 or something, turned to my mother and said, "Is that your house over there?" And she said, "Yes, it is." Those 2 children on the flat roof, were they for your children on the flat roof? So she had to rush back. The babysitter was asleep downstairs. But it was like that. And so I was then at the age of 8. In England, they send you away to boarding school early. I'm always amazed here. Everybody's like, "Oh, I'm going to college, it's so difficult. I can leave home," and things like that, And there's this great drama about leaving home and going to college. I left home at 8. I was packed off to a boarding school at the age of 8. And, it was a completely traumatic experience, going off to a boarding school at the age of 8. I put on a huge amount of weight, so I was not only alone at boarding school, dysfunctional, but also fat. And so I was absolutely a complete target for anybody that wanted to come in my direction. And, I had a terrible time. The bullying, all that sort of stuff. Sort of 8 to 20, it was a boarding school that had from between 8 and 12 or 13. And everyone was merciless. There was no sort of mercy given. And so I, had a really, difficult time. And I got to the point, really, where I was fed up with crying. I made a decision that, I thought, I just don't want to do this anymore. This is to explain why I've got to where I am, But anyway, but it's also to explain, my relationship with spirituality. And I'm going to, today, what I'm going to do is tell you what I think enlightenment is. What it's fundamentally about. And I just want to tell you a little bit about myself, just so you get an idea of where I've come from. So I just was fed up with crying and all that sort of thing. So I sort of, at the age of 12, I made a decision that I was going to stop crying. And I did, and I absolutely made that, that I wasn't going to be at the effect anymore. And, it worked. In that I could read a room when the attention was coming in my direction, and then I could actually make it go in another direction. And, I actually became more functional at that point. But it did repress something. I did actually stop myself going somewhere with that experience. And so I went off to my next school, and that was all fine, and I was rather a sullen child, and, went through another boarding school, up to the age of, I left those schools at 19 and went into the world, went to, we call it university in England, went to college. And all through that time, really, it's interesting that one of the things I did manage to do when I was at my first school was I joined the choir. And so I had all this sort of, come in and have a seat. I had all this sort of, come and have a seat, it's lovely to see you. I had all this sort of, being in the choir stuff. There was no spirituality or religion there. It was just a safe place to be. When I was in that, do have a seat, that's great, nice to see you. It was a safe place to be, and, no one beat you up in the choir. It was sort of like under control. So I sort of connected with that and was okay with it. But once I came out of school and university, I repressed that function, that the emotional side of myself. And I came out and I went to a university, and I went into broadcasting because, that's where I could, draw attention to myself, went into broadcasting, and then into advertising, which again is a way of, drawing attention to yourself. In advertising, it's amazing. You're only as good as your last ad. But when you do an ad and people like it, they say, how marvelous. There's a lot of praise and all that. So I lived on that a bit. But the difficulty was my relationships, were difficult because because I stopped deciding to experience emotion at the age of, 10. It's a bit like when you don't put any fuel any oil in the car. If you don't put any oil in the car, it sort of heats up and eventually it will explode. And so if you're not releasing yourself from an emotional perspective, then what tends to happen is you have to release yourself in other ways. And so, my relationships with women were fairly dysfunctional. I really sort of would use, sex to feel better because it made me feel okay. Smoked a lot of dope, or self-medicated, all that sort of stuff. And it was really about, me feeling better in myself. I was able to carry on. I was working well, in a good advertising agency in London. But I knew somewhere that what I was doing was not sustainable. I'd walk past, we call them tramps in England, homeless people on the street. And I just knew that if I carried on living my life the way it is, I was going to run out of money. I was going to run out of everything. I didn't quite know how to deal with it. And I could feel myself out of control, but still holding down a job and all that sort of business. And of course, I had no interest in spirituality at all. I mean, it was just, the old 1970s, that sort of lifestyle. And then I was at a party one evening, and I invited someone to come out to dinner with me. And we happened to go to an Indian restaurant. And this girl who I took out, she looked around, she said, I'm going to India in a couple of months' time. Would you like to come? And I thought, why not? I might as well go. So I said I would. What I didn't know is that she was going on a sort of 125-mile trek. And that she wasn't just going to India, but, it wasn't that, we were going to stay in nice hotels and wander around and see the Taj Mahal. No, we were going to, it wasn't India, it was Nepal. We were going to Kathmandu. We were going to stay in a nice hotel, but then we were going to go out and we were going to walk for 15 days, up 14,000 feet, 125 miles, and we were not going to get back to our bath, for another 15 days. So it was a huge undertaking. I mean, those days it was quite good. There were 9 of us, and there were 26 Sherpas and porters who carried everything all the way. So I didn't have to do anything. It's an amazing thing. What they do is you get up in the morning, you're woken up by your Sherpa and porter. I don't know if they do this nowadays. You're woken up with a cup of tea and thing to wash your face with. And then while you get up, they pack up all your tent and everything and all the gear, and they march off while you sort of get ready, and then you amble off. And then 3 hours later, you appear in a valley, and they've laid out lunch, for you. And then you eat lunch, and it goes like that. So there's not much to do, but you do have to walk 125 miles. So I was doing this, and I was hating every minute of it. I mean, had to go out with a trowel to go to the loo. It's all, very basic indeed. And I was at this moment where we were right at the top, up 14,000 feet, top of a mountain. And it was at night, and I looked out, and this is in the middle of the Himalayas. And I looked out, and it was just amazing. The cloud line was below me. And so there were these mountains that came out of the clouds like huge icebergs, and there was a huge moon. And I looked out there, and I just thought, wow. There was a huge wow, that came out. And something touched me. And I didn't really recognize it or know what it was. But when I came home, my mother said she knew something was up when I came off the plane wearing Indian clothes and claiming to be vegetarian. And she said that she just knew that there was trouble ahead. And I don't know if you read The Wind in the Willows. I was like Toad in The Wind in the Willows. I got spirituality big time. I really, wanted. And I knew I had a friend of mine who was into all this sort of stuff. And he lived down in Bristol. And I knew he was because when he'd gone to visit his guru in India, he needed money for the airline ticket. And I'd bought all his stereo equipment for virtually nothing and installed it in my flat so he could go and visit his guru. So I went to him and said, look, what's it all about? What is this spirituality? And he said, well, you are in everything and everything is in you. And I thought, well, that's a big help. Thanks very much indeed, And I asked him a lot of questions. Anyway, in the end, he gave me Paramahansa Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi. And I read that book, and it just changed my whole perspective. Because in this book, this guy really wrote as if there was a different reality that I hadn't become aware of. There was a different way of approaching life. There was a whole realm of things that was, dogs hear more and cats see more. There must be more of some sort of way. And this guy wrote as if there was. So I was then absolutely convinced that this was the most important thing in life. And so, being a good consumer, I just wanted to get enlightened. And that was the aim. When you read all the books and you went and saw, you have to get enlightened. And whether it takes, going like Terence Stamp in Meetings with Remarkable Men, whether you go off to an ashram or go and see Bhagwan or whoever it is, you want to get enlightened, and that is the thing. So I did every course under the sun. I did sort of est equivalents, and I wrote off to the Self-Realization Fellowship and, did meditation lessons. I mean, funny enough, my life was just as dysfunctional, except now I was meditating as well as, smoking and stuff like that. I hadn't really changed much, but I was determined that I was going to get enlightened, that this was going to be it. And it's interesting, when you get that bug, first of all, of the whole spiritual thing, you're still the same person, and funny enough, I am still the same person. I've just, roughened up, the edges have sort of slightly changed a bit. But I do think you do change, but more of that a couple of weeks' time. So I really wanted to do this, have this experience of enlightenment. And, I'm embarrassed to say that, after 6 months of intensive looking, I had the experience that I was looking for. And, it is embarrassing because, when I look back on it, it just seemed things fell into place just much too quickly, really. But I did have that experience, the experience that I've been looking for. And it was one of those experiences, and I'm going to describe the experience, I'm not going to skim over it. It's one of those experiences where you think, right, that's it. I understand. I get what you're talking about. Yeah, I know what you're saying. And really, it really totally altered the course of my life, that experience. And it was an interesting experience. I mean, it just came up. I think, when you've been looking and stuff like that, who knows why or whatever. But I was in a room with a group of friends, and we were sitting around and drinking coffee. And one of them said to me, do you play the guitar? And I said, no, I didn't. And he said, well, why don't you give it a go? And there was music playing on the stereo. In those days, we had stereos. There was music playing on the stereo. And so I picked up the guitar, and I started to try and play to the music that was, on the stereo. And I think when I look at it, I think what happened was that when you just completely focus on something changes in your reality, I think. I think if I was going to do an explanation, that's what it was. But I was doing this, and then suddenly I looked up, and just everything that I was looking at changed. And, here I am, I'm looking at you guys. There's Tracy over here, and I can, I'm here and you're there, and I can quite clearly see you over there, and, everything is in its place and it's all fine. But what happened suddenly is the nature of my observation of reality changed. And rather than, me looking out and seeing Barbara over there, there suddenly was an experience of everything being connected. And the experience was that it was as if I was a part of some greater consciousness. There was something that was just beyond, containing me. And not only was it containing me, but as I looked out, I actually, there's optical fibers that just sort of link things. It was as if everything that I looked at was completely linked from something that was somewhere beyond my consciousness, through my consciousness, and I could actually see these tiny little optical fibers really connecting to everything that was there. And I suddenly got an experience of everything being completely connected. And I was like, wow! I mean, it was a huge experience. And I just recognized all the stuff that I'd read in these books. It just made sense suddenly. That nature of actual connectivity. It completely made sense. And the experience lasted, a couple of hours. And it was as if I sort of changed. In the 1970s, you're all much too young to this, but, when you went to an Italian restaurant, they gave you amaretti. I don't know if you remember that. And there was all in a little paper thing. And what we used to do before fire, we used to have the amaretti, which is sort of biscuit, and then we used to make the paper stand up on the plate. And you'd light the top of the paper like that, and it would burn down and then just drift off into the restaurant. It's amazing what you do. But I felt like that. It was as if my personality just burnt down and I floated off somewhere. And I went home. And, I didn't go to work. I didn't know what to do. It was as if, I watched the news and everybody was behaving exactly the same. That there was terrible things going on and people doing things to everybody else. But my understanding was that there was a whole connection between everybody, and that everybody wasn't separate, but we were all connected in a fundamentally deep way. And yet everybody else was behaving as if they weren't. And so, my first thought would say, well, let's just pretend it didn't happen. But you can't sort of unsee something. That didn't work, and I didn't, I couldn't unsee it. And so, it was a very weird experience. It was a bit like, you're invited, I'm English, but you're invited to the number 10 Downing Street, where the Prime Minister lives, for a drinks party, right? And you're invited for the drinks party, and you arrive at the drinks party in number 10 Downing Street. And in the middle of the drinks party, you realize you have to go to the loo. So you go to the loo, you walk off to the loo, and you open the door, and there, in the loo, you see the Prime Minister sitting on the loo. But not only is the Prime Minister sitting on the loo, but his head is on the floor, and he has got a Martian head. And you look at him with his Martian head, with his real head on the floor, and you know that he's a Martian. And he knows that you know that he's a Martian. And you recognize the fact that you have seen that the Prime Minister is in fact a Martian. So you shut the door like that, and you walk away, and you think, what do I do now? Do I go and tell Tracy, hey, I've just seen the Prime Minister's a Martian? People are going to think you're bonkers. And it was the same way, I thought, people are going to think I'm bonkers. And they did, I went into my advertising agency, which is a really big deal, this agency, that I joined only a few months before, and I spent my entire 3 years in advertising trying to get to this agency. And I went in and I thought, well, I cannot carry on doing this, for my job. I cannot carry on working in an advertising agency when I've had this experience, this insight into the nature of reality. I have to go and, I felt I had a duty to communicate this. A duty to communicate, what I understood as being the nature of reality. So I resigned from the agency, and I went off and I delivered leaflets for a wine company for a while. And then I went and worked for, one of those S-type organizations. I sort of went into the spiritual sort of life after that. And I've ended up here. That's the long and short of it, I spent 14 years working as a trainer in those sort of things. And then all these big spiritual organizations like, Aspen, they all end up as businesses, basically. And they all end up working in marketing and advertising and doing corporate trainings. And I ended up doing that. And I thought, this isn't why I left advertising to be a corporate trainer. So I decided to leave advertising, leave the company. I thought, well, where do I go now? And, I couldn't change my name to Prem Anand something. My mother would never have forgiven me. What's she going to say? It's just too embarrassing. I wasn't going to. Yellow's not my. I have my colours done. Yellow's not my colour at all. So, and I thought, it sounded obviously the only place I could really go and talk about this stuff was the church. And of course the church was like, the balmy army. I mean, you just read about it. It's the same over here, really, in terms of, big evangelical churches, all that. It was just totally bonkers stuff. But I just knew he's different, slightly different than the Church of England. If I went into someone and started talking to them about God, they'd run a mile. They'd think I was bonkers. But if they say, well, who are you? And I say, well, I'm a Church of England priest. They say, oh, come in, have a cup of tea. They feel that you're safe and it's totally okay. And I realized that was a place that I could go. And it was quite interesting that when I got there, eventually, long story, you could read about it in my books, basically. When I got there, I discovered there was a whole contemplative tradition within the church that actually, and I'll talk about this a bit next week, but that really at its foundation, you can appreciate Christianity as an Eastern religion. That there is fundamentally an understanding of the interconnectivity of all things within it. But because of sort of 1700 years of ghastliness and people trying to burn each other, to force them to believe things, that's all, has only survived in one particular area. So that's how I've ended up doing this. However, it did give me a real insight into, what I understood the concept of enlightenment to be. Now, I can't pretend to stand here and say, well, this is how you're going to get enlightened and all that sort of business, because, you can't do that. It never works in any shape or form, because, as I said right at the beginning, this is your journey. Everyone has their own particular journey. And actually, whether you have an experience or not is, in one level, and we'll talk about this later, irrelevant. But, for me, it gave me an insight into what that experience was when people talk about enlightenment and what it was. And for me, what it actually came down to, it started off as, in my experience, it was an experience of consciousness. I experienced an aspect of consciousness that existed within myself that I hadn't been conscious of before. And it suggested to me that actually the whole, and other people have said this better than I have, but it's just that the whole enlightenment thing was actually simply a different experience of the consciousness that we already experience at the moment. It's not some mist that's out there or some other thing that you experience outside yourself. It is a coming of understanding as to what the nature of reality is. Now, I'm not very good at drawing, but I have drawn a little picture, and this is where I get to what you were saying, David. I draw a little picture of what I'm trying to say here. And from my understanding, what this is about, is this bit here, the green bit, is the experience that we have of what's out there. My experience of Tracy, her blueness, the space we've got here, I can hear, I can see. These are all our senses and all the stuff that's going on that goes in there and is understood. And here is the unconscious, Jung's memories, dreams and reflections, how you beat your heart, how you breathe, or how you send antibodies, all this sort of stuff that's unconscious. If this is the rational mind, there's the rational mind, and then there is the greater mind, the body mind, everything that enables you, almost the unconscious, that aspect of it. And then what I'm suggesting is that there is a deeper consciousness that is a consciousness of the nature of reality as it fundamentally exists at a much deeper level. And that when people have an experience of enlightenment, what they're actually experiencing is reality at a much deeper level. It's almost like a fourth dimension. And the way that what I'm suggesting here is that I'm suggesting that if I take that concept of consciousness, that concept of consciousness, that actually that concept of consciousness existed at the Big Bang. right at the beginning of the universe, that somehow, and anybody that says that they understand God, you can immediately disbelieve. Because us trying to understand God, or all that stuff, is the way I like to think of it. It's like a fish trying to understand a cash register. Now, for a fish to understand what a cash register is, it's like us trying to understand God. A fish has to understand, first of all, that there's something outside the water. And there's air. And not only air, but they have to understand the idea of getting out of the water and having legs and arms and running around the place. Then they have to get to a point where they understand the nature of the exchange of currency and money and barter. And then finally you get to a cash register. I mean, that is an enormous number of links. And, we haven't a clue. And anybody that says that, we don't. We're not able to understand the nature of that which created us. So, we can't really go beyond that to say what that is. But I'm suggesting that there was an impulse of consciousness at that particular moment that actually created everything that flew out at the Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago. And that all that was thrown out, imbued within it, was that consciousness. It was within those rocks and all the things that were blown out at that particular point. And there was a dynamic. When I'm suggesting that within all those rocks, within everything at the Big Bang, there was a dynamic, an unfolding that was going to happen. And that gradually unfolded into, if we come to here, the Earth, arrived, cooled down, and then those molecules and particles and all those sort of business. There was a move towards, for whatever reason, the emergence of a single cell. Life appeared as almost an expression of that consciousness. There was an order within that command of if you see the Big Bang as a command at some level, of a conscious order creation. And that order came together and formed that single cell. And that single cell, in its own way, was conscious. And that single cell formed into multi-cell things. And plants that you can see, they're conscious of air, they're conscious of wind, they're conscious of light. There is an aspect, there is a mind in there, a consciousness in there that enables them to grow. A plant doesn't think, seed doesn't think, how do I grow? It grows. And that grew and blah, 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 blah. And then, animals and things and more. And suddenly we're here. And we are, not only are we conscious in terms of, being able to feel air and all that sort of business, but we have this unique ability to be able to reflect on our consciousness. We can think, here, I can think about it. And so we really, for the first time in humanity, we become the universe conscious of itself. We become the universe, the part of the universe looking back at the others, and say, I'm conscious of you. And actually, within you is that same consciousness that is conscious of me as well. And the universe is now conscious of itself. And humanity is therefore, the flower of that consciousness. So you can see from there that evolution is in fact, within this particular paradigm, creation and evolution are really a function of the evolution of consciousness. And as consciousness has evolved, so the material side has evolved out of the conscious need for an arm or a leg or a smell or whatever it is. The suggestion I'm making here is that the consciousness is the driving form of evolution, force of evolution. And we are that consciousness, manifest. We are the universe made conscious of itself. Where suddenly and as evolution goes on, my son will not develop, an extra long thumb for texting. That is not. I'd like to suggest that really, as consciousness evolves, that evolution is not going to continue necessarily to go on, a hugely physical level of consciousness, a physical level of evolution. And where evolution will go, it is in the evolution of consciousness in terms of our ability to experience the actual nature of the connectivity of all things. That is the next step. The next step in the evolution of consciousness, in evolution, is us to become consciously aware of the interconnectedness of all things and aware of that consciousness that is within everything. And actually, that consciousness is calling us all the time. That's why we're here. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because somewhere the consciousness said, "Oh, you, look at this and go and tell other people." It is how it's developing. Now, contrary to what you might think at the moment, I don't really believe in putting out ideas here that aren't proven and all that sort of business. But I did hear one idea that I really liked. And that idea was, it takes something like 7 billion neurons in the brain for you to become a human being. The difference between a Neanderthal and a human being is like 2 billion neurons. The number of neurons, it enables you to identify yourself. And the idea that I quite like is now the Earth has now got 8 billion people on the Earth. And almost, it is like the Earth is becoming, humanity is becoming conscious of itself. And you can see it in, the global village in television, in the creation of the internet, in the whole way that there is a different, almost, it's called the noosphere. There's a different sphere of consciousness that is being created. Something can happen in China in 1 minute, and I can know about it 2 minutes later here. I mean, that is an extraordinary thing. And so, what I'm suggesting is that actually, when you have that experience of enlightenment, what the experience of enlightenment is a seeing of that consciousness, is a hearing of that consciousness, is however it is communicated, and it's communicated in different ways. When you look it up, people talk about the music of the spheres. People hear about the interconnectivity by hearing just some sort of magic experience in sound. Or you can see it, people talk about seeing the light or whatever it is. There is an experience that enables people to realize that there is a greater consciousness, that there is a greater connectivity between all things. What do you reckon? Any thought? Has anybody had a similar experience to the one that I'm describing? Just put your hands up. Any a series of connecting to all things? You have? Anybody else? Yeah, you have. Do you want to say a little bit about your? Yeah, that would be great. Just a little bit about your experience. Yeah.
It's been actually very recent, and I just love being outside and with nature and gardening. And I just had an epiphany that, oh my God, this is it. This is me. I'm not thinking, I'm not paying attention to anything, but my whole essence is totally involved in what I am doing. I'm tireless and I'm inspired, I'm guided. And it was a big breakthrough for me because I'm very, very mental.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Barbara, do you want to say a little bit about the experience?
About a year ago, I hiked 100 miles on the Camino. And it was really an interesting experience because the first day is kind of tough. I was carrying a very heavy pack, and it was a hard day. And as time went on, because we hiked for 7 days, it was very interesting that I came to realize there were a ton of people on the trail. We were there in August, and it was very busy. But it occurred to me that everybody had struggles. Everybody was on their own path, and we were all walking it together. And it just became very spiritual. I mean, it just put me into a heart space that I'd never experienced. And I'm going back next year.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
To Portugal.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the idea that there is a fundamental interconnectedness of all things, and that our consciousness is connected, has a fundamental impact on the way that we see the world. That we all actually somehow are sharing that same consciousness. We all share the bit that's here in the middle. We all understand that, and we all have our own bits that make us work. But not only that, I am sharing I am the same consciousness looking out at Tracy as she is somewhere in there looking out at me. And we are both part of the same aspect of it. And that has big impact. There's a lovely story that I've told before. I know people have heard this a few times, but I know some of you haven't, so I'm going to say. There's a lovely apocryphal story. People tell me it never happened, but it doesn't really matter. When Einstein arrived in England, in America, he was met off the boat by a reporter. And the reporter asked Einstein, said, Professor Einstein, can you tell me, what is the most important question you can ask about life? What is the most important question you can ask about life? Great question to ask Einstein. And he asked Einstein this question, what's the most important question you can ask about life? And Einstein said to him, the most important question you can ask about life is the universe a friendly place or not? Is the universe a friendly place or not? Because if the universe is not a friendly place, then we should spend all our resources, all our understanding, everything we've got, all our money to protect ourselves from an unfriendly universe. Sounds familiar with foreign policy, really, doesn't it? If the universe is neither friendly or unfriendly, then as Gloucester says, we are simply wanton, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. It doesn't really matter what we do if there is nothing there. But if the universe is a friendly place, then surely what we should be doing is spend all our energy, all our attention, all our understanding, all our money working out how to cooperate with the universe. And that, to me, makes a huge difference. It means that really what our life should be about is looking at what our relationship is with the universe and how to have a better relationship with the universe. And it becomes about that. And issues, we suddenly realize that we are connected, we are one community, and issues of scarcity become, it's not only China's problem, it becomes our problem. All the problems come together in that sort of a way. So what I'm really suggesting here is to consider the possibility that this could be. I'm not, I always say, in this course, that, I offer these ideas out with the willingness to be wrong. And, who knows, but it is something actually to consider, whether or not, and think about how we might act differently if that was the case. I've done this course for kids, and we did it here. And I was looking at, what the scarcity, and I had something like 30 kids on the course. And I brought in 4 bowls of candy and put the 4 bowls of candy on the floor. And I split the group up into 6 different groups. And I said, you're 6 different groups now. I'm going to ask you to go outside. Then I'm going to get the first group to come in and take the candy, and the second group, and the third group, and the fourth group after that. And of course, what happened is the first group came in and literally took everything. They stuffed their pockets and everything. And they left some 3 or 4. And by the third group, there was absolutely nothing left. And really, that is how we run our world at the moment. We run our world, almost first come, first serve. But, the understanding that there is an understanding, if we all share the same reality and consciousness, there is enough to go around. And we know that because we all share all the things that are there to go around. And there are big implications. Now, I'm going to ask you just to reflect on this in a way in a moment, but I just want to see, is any other questions? Anybody want to say anything about what I've just said? Okay. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do in a moment is I'm going to ask you to stand up, and I'm going to ask you to come over to this table over here. And on this table are some cards. Now, not quite yet. Those of you at home, if you look on the page, if you've magnified your screen full screen, then put it down so it's not full screen. You'll see just above it, it says Developing Consciousness. It says click here for handouts for the course. Now, if you click on the handout, there are two handouts there that both have cards on it. I think it says 3 cards 1 and 3 cards 2. If you click on those and download them onto your computer, you can actually see some of the cards that are here. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just look at those cards and choose one card from the handout. And here, what I'd like you to do is to stand up, and I want you to come over here, and I want you to look at the cards that are on this table, and I'm going to ask you to pick one. Now, I know each of you is a unique entity and you couldn't possibly pick a card. They all represent who you are, but just for the sake of time and knowing we've got an event coming in here after me, if you could just be as quick as you just pick one card, I'd really appreciate that. So just give you a bit of time to do that. When you've got your card, I want you to take it back and have a seat with your card. Now, when you're sitting down, just have a look at the card. Okay, so have a look at the card in front of you. I'm just going to ask you just to think to yourself the answers to these questions that I'm going to ask now. First of all, why did you choose that card? And at home, if you have managed to download and gone through all of that, if you haven't, doesn't matter. But if you have a look at your card and just answer the same questions. Why did you choose that card? Now, what is the person or persons or entity on the card feeling, both positively and negatively? What are they feeling, the persons or entity on that card, positively and negatively? What does it make you feel when you look at it? What do you aspire to in the card? And what do you fear in the card? And where is that consciousness, that, whatever, divine or whatever, that fundamental creative consciousness, where is that in the card? Where is it coming through? And how is that consciousness interacting with the personal entity on the card? And what's their reaction? How do they react to it? And how does that fit in with the way that you relate to either God or spirituality or whatever that stuff is? How does it relate to the way you think about that? Okay, I'm just going to put you in threes now. So if you three could get together, just form your chairs around together. And you three could just form your chairs around together so you can talk to each other. And if you could just move your chair over there, or just get that chair and do that. What I'd like you to do, and if you're at home, if you're with someone, you could do this. Otherwise, you just have to make it up at this point. And go and put on a cup of tea, perhaps. Come back. We'll be coming back in a moment. But what I'd like you to do is to just take it in turn to show your card to the other people and just describe a little bit about why you chose it, why it's important to you, what you noticed about it, what you noticed about yourself in relationship to it, and use it just as a way of you describing your relationship with spirituality. Any questions? Any questions? Okay, so I'll give you some time to do that. That would be great. So just introduce yourself and decide who's going to go first.
That's very, very important.
No, it's both. I mean, it's both.
Okay, so I'm going to... one more. Sorry, you carry on. Sorry.
Okay. I think this card
Talk among yourselves.
I'd like
Just going to finish this one.
hands pushing away. I also saw that there was, I find myself very resistant, as you do too, even though I know I've had very many experiences with people like, oh, did you feel God in that moment? I'm like, no, it's a nice day, but I just didn't get there. And I don't know if I'm like pushing it away as a resistance, but where someone tries to tell you, this is the feeling you should be having, or I know you're here now, it's like, okay, well, I'm not, it's not there. So I feel like there's a lot of resistance in there, but I feel like I know, a lot of people have an experience where he said he saw the things going on. And my sister saw the light in the Eucharist, it's like, well, I haven't had one of those. So is it like a total belief that they exist, that they don't exist type of a thing? But, it's kind of like I know that people, and I think maybe too in relationships I tend to keep people at like that. So that's just the kind of thing that's so there. But as far as like a spirituality, I feel like it's all around me. And if I just take my hands down, maybe it'll just I'll move through that resistance and be part of it. So I'm always setting myself up with opportunities. I just got back to the community myself. Yeah, I walked with my sister in Lyon. We started in Lyon and then drove to the Iron Cross, walked to the Iron Cross, and then started actually south on the French way.
Okay, so then did you go? Okay, I think we'll have to talk more. But did you like it?
I loved it, Yeah, it's just, we were 7 days.
Okay, I'm just going to stop you a moment now, and I'm just going to ask if anyone would like just to say a few words about their cards. David hasn't got it finished yet, are you? Just going to ask you just to join us for a moment. And maybe someone would like just to talk about why they've chosen their card. Anyone particularly can talk about their card? I'm asking volunteers to talk about their cards at the moment. Oh, thank you very much. That's good. Come on, let's try it. There we are. So I'm going to just show this round. And Heather, if you could just zoom in on this, that card there. I'm going to show everybody. Can you see that? This is the card. So perhaps, Tracy, you could just say why you chose that. Have they seen that card now, Heather? Yeah. I'll come back to you. You can do that. So this is the card anyway. Yeah, just say a little bit about it.
Okay, well, I chose this card because I felt that the hands that are on the bottom and kind of pushing away as a resistance that you're having to any kind of a spiritual experience. And I've been in a lot of situations where people have expressed a tremendous experience of being a very much of a God moment or a very spiritual moment, and saying, "Oh, don't you feel that? Don't you feel that?" And I don't feel it. So I feel like I have a resistance to it. Maybe my hands are up as a part of resistance, but I also feel like in this card the person is it's all around. They're totally enveloped in it, and if they would just put their hands down, that they would experience it pretty immediately. So I feel like that is what I felt with this card.
So you were saying just for yourself, sometimes you experience, people say, haven't you not had this experience? Say, no, I haven't, therefore you must have all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's really important to say that the experience itself is not really the issue. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. The most important thing, and some people do have an experience of this and some people don't. Now, in this room, who has had an experience? 1, 2, anybody else? Now, the question really is, is it possible that reality does exist? That there is an interconnectedness of all things? And if so, what implications does that have on the way that you run your life? That is the real exploration. Some people do get a glimpse of it. Some people are colorblind and can't see, some people are deaf. Some people have different sorts, some people can appreciate, some people can sing a note and some people can't. And there is an affinity, I think, in some senses to having different sorts of experiences. But what's important here is more, can I rely on that potential reality? could you explore the possibility of the universe being a friendly place? That is what I want to say is important. We'll talk about a little bit more about that next week. But, it is easy to say, well, I haven't had that experience, so I must, but it's the concept that's important, I think. Yeah. And again, I hand you now. I know you. Do you want to say a little bit of?
This is just sort of an evoke. I'm not so sure you have the aha moment.
Go,
or
yeah,
more,
hold the microphone.
I'm not so sure you have the aha
Yes.
moment or little notice awareness of little moments that are like opening up in this direction.
I think that is so important because, I talked about the fact that, I came back from India and I'm still the same person. I'm still, smoking, drinking and all that sort of business, but being spiritual. I think that gradually you do have those small openings that go along the way and you look at glimpses of that. That's the sort of thing you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that you can have, well, for me, I've had a recent thing that was a little thing that is sort of opening up to bigger things, like just leading with an open heart, with faith that the world will kind of provide for you, having an experience with a girl like, don't worry about it, a parking space will open up for us. Yes. And there it was, and got up on the, and we got out of a dilemma, and just more and more of those experience of being led by the heart, open-hearted, and just faith that things will open up with this awareness that the universe, we are interconnected, and it will provide for you. But that's a subtle shift.
Led by the heart. You feel you're being led by the heart, and that's a lovely communication of almost, a connection with the universe. That you're being led, touched. There's wonder. There's beauty. That's not in the mind.
Yes, that's so. Yes, coming.
That it is in the heart. Can I just ask you which you chose? Can I?
Just this one.
Do you want to say yeah? Do you want to say a little bit about why you chose that?
Well, I see her as serene, and she's making connection from the heart. And there's a little bit of separation. So there's a little bit of fear of separation, yes, or of living separately. A little bit on the suppression of speech around the throat and challenge, but still she remains compassionate or serene, yes, even with resistance and some,
And we do, all of us have that resistance, don't we, in different sorts of ways. I think that where it isn't, the universe, I love the idea that the universe is calling to us and we're gradually responding and answering in little ways and developing that relationship. Remember that idea of spirituality is the cultivation of a sensitive and rewarding relationship with eternal truth and love. And it's the cultivation of that. Anybody else like to say anything just about their card? It's on. I'll give you it in the handout, but it's the cultivation of a sensitive and rewarding relationship with eternal truth and love. Yeah. Yes. No, that's lovely. Thank you.
So I found her to be very at peace, it seemed, and the reason why I liked it because it looked like she had guides all around. She had guide. I'm being guided. But then when you led us through the questions, I started examining the faces, and they almost looked like they were judging. Yes. And I'm working on some judging myself issues. But the inner guide came through, and how I could stay at peace even if others and myself are judging. There's a sense of inner wisdom that brings peace.
I love that the inner guide comes through. I think that's wonderful. We talked last week about how we're constantly making decisions about everything. We've all made decisions about each other here. You've made lots of decisions about me. And there's constant decision making going on. And really, unless one is able to live in an open-hearted way, to drop down from those decisions into one's heart and connect from the heart rather than the mind, then we never get beyond those decisions. And it's interesting that they're all around the mind, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Those different decision-making things. And our role really is to drop down into our hearts, and even, to some extent, one could say that the universe talks to us through our hearts, and we connect through our hearts. Now, minds haven't survived, but our hearts open and connect with that universe.
Yeah.
Thank
Anybody else want to say anything about either their card or... Now, I'm just going to ask you to pass it. I'm always afraid of the cards being trousered, as we call this. In England, the word trousered means stolen. Because some people do very attached to a card, and therefore, thank you very much. You just put it on the table. I mean, I think the concept that there is an interconnectedness between all things is a total game changer in the way that we live our lives. It is the difference between being separate and being connected. And of course, our minds, they're the actual bits that tell us that we're separate. I mean, it's great that they do. Civilization was built on the mind working out all the wonderful things that it needs to do. However, the whole purpose of experiencing oneself as being separate is so that I can survive David, so that I can make sure that David's not going to pull one over on me, that I can make sure that I get out of the room without being killed by David. In the old days, that's what it was like. And therefore, I need to experience myself as separate from David. That is the mind's perspective, but the heart's perspective is a different perspective. And really, you only have that heart's perspective when you're in some extent when you're in a safe place. When you're in a place where you can let your heart be open, and where your mind doesn't get involved. And that makes a difference to the way that we live our lives. Then you're thinking, I love that thing in the Taoist Ching. The Taoist Ching is come on to that bit more next week. It's a lovely Taoist thing. In the Taoist Ching, it says that your enemy is the shadow that you yourself cast in the world. And that idea that your enemy is the shadow that you yourself cast in the world. And that idea is that as you look out into the world, that actually you're looking at aspects of yourself completely. And that your enemy, let's say David again, who's going to kill me, the enemy, David in a sense is the shadow as my enemy that I cast in the world. And therefore, if I'm going to be dealing with David as my enemy, I have to look at myself. I have to look at what is it in me that is creating that aspect, because there is a connectedness of all things. Now really, the rest of this course is about unpacking that connectedness. What are the implications of it? How does it work? How do other cultures think about this? What is the implications in terms of developing? But what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask you, I know some of you weren't here last week, but last week we had a process really where we looked and gazed at that mandala. And the gazing process, for those that weren't here, is, Heather, our audiovisual person, is going to facilitate you at home being able to do this. The gazing process is this, is where you look at the mandala and you make a decision where it's possible not to blink. Obviously, you have to blink. You make a decision not to blink. And as the mandala goes out of focus, you let it go. The mind will want to press it back into focus, just like the mind wants to keep things being separate. The mind will say, no, the mind will want to see it as it is on the wall. But if you let it swim, if you let it go, I'm going to get you to do this in a moment, so you have to do it quite yet. If you let it swim, you'll find that it begins to move. Things come out of it. And the mind will say, no, that's not real. No, that's not happening at all. But it'll give you an opportunity just to watch your mind as it struggles with what is real and what is not real. And that is really the experience we're talking about now. So you look at the mandala, you gaze at it, you let it just do what it wants to do. You don't press it back into focus. If you do blink, just blink, but don't come into focus. And just watch your mind and see what happens. Any questions? I'm going to give you about 4 minutes doing that. So I'm going to be sitting over here. And what I'm going to do is, after a minute or two, I'm going to just read something. Just to give your mind something also just to be aware of while I'm doing that. And hopefully you'll be able to hear me at home while I'm reading that. If you can hear me at home while I'm reading that, would be great. So I'm going to bang my gong and then just gaze at it. Just let it go. Notice what your mind wants to do with it. And let the shape form itself. Be aware of what your mind is doing. The essence of all experience is consciousness. The essence of all experience is consciousness. It is the common element of all experience. It is the one undoubtable fact of all life. Consciousness is that within which all experience is constructed. It is the essence and substance of everything we know. Consciousness is the ultimate reality. This essence is the essence of everyone. Whatever their race, age, gender, background, rich or poor, whatever their time. It is the essence of all things. Whatever people think, experience, or believe, they are all conscious beings and thus share the same inner essence. This essence is the essence of all things, whatever their shape, density, body, sense, or nervous systems, whatever their perception of the world. Where we differ from other creatures is not in consciousness itself, but in the picture that is painted in our consciousness. As human beings, we are privileged in that we have the potential to become aware of this inner essence, to know that inner essence, to have a sense of God. Okay, it's 3 o'clock now. We're going to finish. I just want to say that we don't charge, but there is a contributions plate at the back if you'd like to do that. I've got here the handouts. Barbara, would you mind just putting those on the back table just to where the water is? There are handouts from today's session, so do feel free to take one of those. The handout is, if you're watching at home, the handout is on the page under the Developing Consciousness heading, so you can download it from there. If you've missed other ones and you want to catch up on it, there is a book which includes all the material of the course that you can catch up on that. That's available at the back. And next week, we're going to look at the tradition of mystical reality. And that really is, this experience that we're talking about, how have other cultures represented that? How does it relate in different circumstances? So if you're around, do pop in and come see that. 1:30 next week. As they used to say in my youth, same bat time, same bat channel. And thank you very much for coming today. I really appreciate that. Heather, if you mind putting on the music, that'd be great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.